This is BDO in the Boardroom, a podcast by the BDO Center for Corporate Governance for the Board of Directors and those charged with governance. We're joined by your board peers and inspiring leaders to discuss the trending and timeless issues that are impacting today's boardroom agendas. Let's get started.
Hi, it's Amy Rojic, your host of BDO in the Boardroom and founder, director of BDO's Center for Corporate Governance. And I'm very excited to be joined today by Samantha Capagoda, who has graciously agreed to share her thoughts and expertise with respect to the dynamic work of technological innovation occurring in business today and the risk aspects to organizations that the board of directors may not yet be thinking about or considering. But first, a bit about my guest. Samantha serves as an independent director, currently serving as chair of the nominating committee for Credit Suisse funds, now under the UBS umbrella, as well as a member of the business board and governing council for the University of Toronto. In addition to board service, she holds current positions as the chief data scientist and co-founder of Numerati Partners LLC, a firm that evaluates AI and emerging technology for Fortune 500 and middle market stakeholders. She's also a visiting scholar for Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences at NYU, one of the 4 centers of excellence in science computing in North America, and prior roles as the senior economist and head of analytics at Caxton Associates, a global macro hedge fund with $15 billion of assets under management. She was recognized as one of the 21 significant and diverse directors by directors and boards on their 2024 Directors to Watch listing. Samantha is also a seasoned leader with over 25 years of global experience across digital transformation, data analytics, financial management, risk governance, and strategy. And she contributes insights in the boardroom, including AI, cybersecurity, and finance, by leveraging her operating experience, harnessing data and analytics to drive ROI and mitigate risks derived throughout her career as a data scientist, entrepreneur, economist, investment professional. So Samantha, we are so fortunate to have you with us today. So welcome to you.
Thank you, Amy.
All right. So just to dive right in here, we're all participating in an environment marked by expanding technological implementation and scaled usage using a variety of tools, including innovative modeling, platforms, and programming across vast amounts of data. And I am fresh off some truly candid and frank board peer exchange conversations this week. So I would like to come at my questions from a few organizational components. So first, we're going to talk about the human resources and workforce impact. So many organizations are rapidly adopting AI and automation. So Samantha, what are some overlooked risks, perhaps unintended introduction of bias, employee surveillance, or unintended consequences of automation that boards should perhaps be weighing more carefully as they consider this dynamic transformation?
Amy, thank you for your warm welcome. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. So let's consider where we are now in 2025. Bias is a big topic. And when we think about HR, before the widespread use of algorithms, HR professionals conducted, or at the very least had significant input into interview candidate selection, hiring, salaries, advancement. But now many of these processes have been either partially or even entirely automated. So automation could increase processing speed, scale relative to what humans can do, but they may also risk replicating or even amplifying human biases. So as we choose to use these tools in the search for objectivity, there could be unintended consequences. At the moment, there's not much regulatory oversight of automated employment decision tools, but there is New York Law 114, and that prohibits employers and employment agencies from deploying these tools unless they've undergone an annual bias audit with public disclosure. So another thing to consider is whether, any of these tools might incorporate that rule of thumb, the viewpoint that gaps in employment history are bad. So if, there isn't a human in the loop, boards need to consider what if candidates are ranked lower when they've had unavoidable gaps in employment. And think about, the ethical considerations. What if those gaps in employment are due to raising children, an absence of daycare, or recurring health issues? So then you might be disproportionately affecting women or individuals with disabilities. So I think you also asked about employee surveillance, and that's another hot topic, right? Employees are now in various types of jobs, they're being monitored using sensors, right? Whether it's counting keystrokes, whether it's monitoring based on the app on a phone, whether it's sensors in a harness or in a hard hat, and it's for productivity optimization, health improvement, or mitigation. Some employees have KPIs or other kinds of targets or metrics for what they should be accomplishing. But, boards have to ask the question, is this OSHA compliant? Is the company violating privacy regulations? What about HIPAA?
I think these are all really important questions to ask, and probably not something that the board was regularly even thinking about before, right? So I think there's a lot more to this than meets the eye when you start digging into how these tools, as you were outlining in your examples, could significantly impact your talent, your workforce, your opportunity to attract and retain if you're basing this on, poor logic, right? So thank you for those thoughts. Maybe we'll shift gears here and look at the regulatory compliance and legal risks. So with the proliferation of regulations around AI, data privacy, and cybersecurity, which are rapidly evolving globally, where do you see the biggest gaps in how boards assess compliance risks? And are there particular legal blind spots that could pose serious financial or reputational threats, in your opinion?
So I think since, the really initial release of generative AI tools, it's been a little more than 2.5 years. And I think it's apparent there's much more complexity in board governance, right? If you look at AI regulation in the US, it's currently decentralized across the states without any federal overarching regulation. Let me give you an example. There's the Colorado AI Act. This imposes obligations on providers and deployers to employ care to protect consumers from algorithmic discrimination. So, big question a board has to ask is, how does a company keep up? If there are 50 different regulations, how does the company keep up? If you look further afield, there's the EU AI Act of 2024, and that's the most comprehensive regulation to date. And it imposes requirements by classifying AI systems into 4 risk-based categories, and that's prohibited or unacceptable risk, high risk, those triggering transparency obligations, and then general purpose systems. And what's interesting about it is it's applicable to all participants in the AI value chain. And here's where it gets really interesting. It applies to, and I'm quoting, product manufacturers, providers, deployers, importers, distributors, and authorized representatives. And it applies to providers and deployers outside the EU if the systems or outputs are used in the EU jurisdiction. So that's another level of complexity. Other regulations to be considered when using AI are the privacy statutes. Again, there are 50 different states, and it's a patchwork quilt to keep up with. One other piece is, how do you keep up with the terms of service that many systems come with? For example, I believe it was summer 2023, a popular communication platform apparently had changed their terms of service, and users couldn't opt out. And apparently the terms of service said that any content discussed or disclosed in these online communications could be used to train models, their models. And there was an uproar in social media. And what happened afterwards was that they changed the terms of service back. So that's the piece I think that is kind of still a little bit missing from the board purview, to ask the question as to whether there's provenance on terms of service and whether the GC function or the CCO function is tracking that, because they change. And, is there a gap analysis that transpires every time they change? The big open question is, in the US, we now have the big, beautiful bill proceeding, and it includes a 10-year moratorium on states' regulation on AI. So there's a question as to what will happen with the state regulation.
Yeah, all great points. And I think, at least I'm aware of several large law firms that are doing their darndest to build trackers to be tracking all of these types of things and thinking through those. So I would heavily leverage those to the extent you're able to. But yeah, it's a brave new world. And I think when I talk to boards, it's very eye-opening to understand where all of these regulations are in terms of the process. And we've seen, particularly if you're following all the ESG rules and regulations, you see a lot of stops and starts and changes and delays, and then expected delays that don't come to fruition. So you get another big shock when you thought you had more time to prepare and then you don't. So I think it's really important to be very vigilant in terms of tracking these types of things and how they may impact. And then to your point, particularly on terms of service and how contractual arrangements are changing their terms, to really be paying attention and ensuring that your compliance function is doing that. I think that's really apropos here. So let's again shift gears and turn our attention to operational resilience and business continuity. So as we think about companies integrating emerging technologies into their operations, what risks do boards tend to underestimate in terms of system dependencies, supply chain vulnerabilities, or cyber threats, and how can they better prepare for disruptive technological failures? And kind of think of this as some of the technology debt that we've talked about in prior programming that I've been involved in.
So let me start with the first question. I don't think it's so much that boards are underestimating. I think it's more that things are transpiring in real time, right? So I think the extent to which it comes into the boardroom or is on the radar of the board for some parts of your question is, when there's an issue, because this is not a situation where there's advanced planning, right? There are changes in companies in real time. But on system dependencies, boards are definitely asking questions about AI ethics, right? They're asking about bias. They're asking, in some cases, like what data are being used to train their models. And I know that, these days the word bias is a little bit loaded. So, the way I frame it is that I ask the question, is the data representative of the general population or the population that is relevant for the question that's being asked? And then that kind of bridges the gap if you say algorithmic bias, I think sometimes people don't necessarily respond all that well. To move to AI supply chain, that's a difficult one, right? Because you could have supply chain vulnerabilities and risks introduced through third-party components, through vendors, other collaborators. And these vulnerabilities, they can be exploited by malicious actors for various purposes. Could be unauthorized access, data theft, business disruption. Vulnerabilities could result in data poisoning attacks, prompt injection, model theft. But I think boards have been asking questions about cybersecurity for a long time. I think now to expand those questions to ask about software management, vendor management, or expanded software management, incorporating AI, questions about new tools, vendor management, and frequency of audits. On the cyber threat side, I wanted to relate to you an exploit from late last year. But I recently read a statistic that over 50% of US and UK companies had actually been targets of financial scams using deep fakes. That's video or audio content purporting to be somebody. So I believe it was Q4 last year, a multinational firm was the target of a video deepfake, which led to an employee paying out $25 million. So the media reported that an employee of this company received a phishing email claiming to come from the headquarters. And the email said there was a need for the secret transaction to be carried out. So apparently the employee was suspicious because that's like a classic phishing email thing, right? But then what happened is apparently they received a video call with people that they were familiar with that looked like the people they knew, their fellow employees, authorizing this secret transaction. So I think here boards can continue to ask questions about employee training, right? Because this is a combination of phishing plus social engineering plus deepfake, right? I think boards can ask questions about employee training. Has this been updated to include deepfakes? I mean, I know of directors that have asked to be included in the training themselves.
No, I think that's incredibly valuable. The more examples you're sharing, the more I think people really understand the complexity and the sophistication of these things. I know we had one example recently this week where my colleague received an email and it was really, really authentic looking. And it named a specific employee from, an internal support staff. And it was very interesting because it was one of the phishing attacks because it asked her to, go and ensure, double check that the program that we had requested was properly set up. Well, we had never requested the program, but it looked like something we would do because it named our particular group within our organization. It listed an employee who had been up until very recently an employee here. And luckily, my colleague was very savvy and she's like, I don't trust this, and did a little digging. Sure enough, the employee was no longer with us that it had referenced, and it was just not but it looked extremely authentic. So I think the communication, the continuing education around the sophistication of these attacks is incredibly important. But to your point on the third party issues, that's the scary part for, I think, a lot of companies is how can you mitigate against that? How can you really be, to use the word again, vigilant in your approach to that as a board? How are we ever going to close those loops?
Well, I think that's, especially with large companies, they tend to have pretty rigorous vendor or third-party audits, but just like cybersecurity traditionally, it's not a one and done. It's something you continue to do and continue to have version control, right? If there's a version update, then, the audit repeats.
Exactly. All right. Our last topic that I wanted to cover with you today, Samantha, is around strategic oversight and accountability. Many boards that rely on management to assess the technology risks, but are there key areas where directors should be asking tougher questions? How can they build their own fluency in emerging risks from technology and ensure that they're not overly dependent on internal reports? So again, a couple of questions there.
So I think boards are pretty good at asking tough questions. So this is expanding their purview. It's another topic. So I think what seems to be top of mind at the moment are the ethical consideration as part of board oversight. I think they've become good at asking those questions. But a couple of things that jump out are, are the task forces working on adoption multidisciplinary? Does it not just the CTO, CRO, CISO, but, is the GC function involved? And that's an important one. When you're thinking of use case identification, are you classifying based on risk levels, similar to the EU AI Act? How are you prioritizing the use cases? And then when you think about ROI estimates, the board can ask about ROI because it's a forecast, right? It's not a certainty. Timelines and milestones being applied to uncertain outcomes. And the other thing is those costs are being incurred now, but outcomes are uncertain and they may be sometime in the future. And the outcomes could be qualitative, not quantitative. Like, for example, enhancing customer experience by implementing a chatbot. So I think the other thing that's really important is on the human capital side, asking about hiring priorities and strategies for hiring and managing a technical workforce, whether it's onshore or whether it's offshore, because that's a different question. And also the question of how do you create a cohesive culture across these disparate offices? And I think finally, the question that is sometimes forgotten is how does the company go about upskilling and reskilling the part of the workforce that's less technologically adept, but still needs to keep up? On the director side and fluency, I think it's a good thing for the entire board to strive for technology conversancy, at least, maybe not fluency, because I think unduly relying on one digital director to lead all such discussions seems like it wouldn't be a good idea. And there's several sources of education. For example, I recently served as faculty at the NACD Masterclass on Technology Innovation and Oversight. And this was run for the second year in a row, and it's a 2-day masterclass on board governance and AI. And I have to applaud directors who are so engaged that they sign up for 2 days worth of content on this complex topic. There are also various universities that have courses and workshops. There are so many more options now to engage relative to 2.5 years ago when GPT 3.5 was released. Another route to go is to, look at independent external experts or the board's trusted advisors and consultants for periodic briefings, because they do this a lot, or at least the latter do this a lot, and they keep up. One caveat, I think, is there are certain kinds of external experts that consider operational and research issues rather than board governance. So I think one has to think about which lens the external expert is wearing when they're presenting to the board.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'll just give some examples of that as well, because I agree with you. I think we engage a lot with our clients on a variety of topics, but we do that through a board lens when we're speaking to a board. So I think it's really important to very much understand the audience and what their specific questions and responsibilities are in that regard. But I've also found really great connectivity and discussion evolution in peer forums. So seeking out board peer forums, which are becoming more and more popular, whether it's your advisors that are hosting those, whether it's organizations like Corporate Board Member, the Association of Audit Committee Members, Inc., or NACD, or any of the larger universities that are doing that as well. I think it's an excellent way to stay sharp and get different perspectives and hear the examples that people are experiencing in practice. And most of these are under Chatham House rules. So it's really a nice way to open up and really go deep into topics and really understand the risk and opportunity. I think we often focus so much on the risk that we sometimes neglect the true opportunity that these tools and technologies are allowing companies to grow and to experience real growth. So I think it's important to recognize that while at the same time, ensuring you're mitigating risk. So anyway, but Samantha, I want to truly thank you. I know you do a lot of speaking in this area based on your really extreme volume of experience that you're engaged in. So appreciate you taking the time, especially during this lovely spring weather we're experiencing, where both of us are probably sounding a little bit like we need to cough and sneeze all at the same time. But thank you. And I look forward to having you back and following this trend and seeing where it's going to lead us, because we've just scratched the surface today, clearly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate it.
All right. And thank you to our audience. And please stay tuned for more BDO in the Boardroom.
Thank you for listening to BDO in the Boardroom. If you like the show, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions about what we discussed today, reach out to us via bdo.com, where you can also access the resources cited in this episode and learn more about the BDO Center for Corporate Governance. The views expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of BDO.